All right, hello there. How are you? Welcome back to Mike Check with Mike Shaw. This is episode number 6. Very excited. It's a Tuesday, which at least is not a Monday. It is September 18th. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Waiting for the National Weather Service to issue a flash flood watch for tomorrow. Here's why that's important. As you may know, every time the National Weather Service issues a flash flood watch, nothing happens. So, one of two things. They probably will issue a flash flood watch because conditions look pretty good for some heavy rainfall tomorrow. And if they do, then we'll see. Maybe the jinx won't apply. And maybe we'll get the heavy rainfall that we want, as long as everyone stays safe, all that good stuff. Or the other thing that could happen is maybe they won't issue a flash flood watch and we'll get some flooding or some heavy rain. I don't know about flooding. Heavy rain would be good. All right, got that out of the way. Let's get to our guest. Very excited to have him back on the show. We love R Street Institute. We're talking about free markets, real solutions. rstreet.org is the place to go. And back on the show, he is your fellow for technology and innovation policy, Caleb Watney. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Mike. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah, thank you for coming back. We have a lot of cool stuff to talk about, and I love this stuff, and you know a lot about it. So I'm looking forward to learning some stuff. Now, let me just read the first part of your bio here at R Street. Caleb Watney is a technology policy fellow at R Street Institute, where he leads R Street's work on emerging technologies. We'll talk about that, including autonomous vehicles. We'll talk about that. Artificial intelligence. We're going to probably start with that. Drones. I don't know if we'll get to that. Robotics and medical tech. And we'll talk about 5G as it relates especially to med tech. And in his role, he regularly meets with policymakers, files regulatory comments, writes op-eds, and manages the technology policy working group. And he appears on podcasts like this one. So that's a lot of stuff, Caleb. And I think I want to start with one of your publications from your page.
Sure.
We talk about all of this technology that's coming and all this technology that's actually already here, and the disruption that it's causing. And you have an article from the Heartland Institute from last month, actually July, 2 months ago. Las Vegas Union demands protection against automation. This is a real challenge, I think, for a lot of people to understand. If robots are taking their jobs, they kind of freak out. And you kind of make the point, don't freak out. It's going to be okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the last 200 years really of history is just a story of technological innovation and the way that gets incorporated into our economy. And of course, whenever there is some new innovation, it might cause some initial job loss. But in the end, it's being, adopted into the economy because it leads to lower prices, better quality goods, more access for low-income consumers. And, in the end, all these claims about mass unemployment, which have been happening for decades and decades, they've just never come to pass. We're sitting close to record unemployment numbers.
Right.
And that's because, employment is in many ways, partnered with innovation. And as we get, better innovation, more technology, that can actually increase productivity for workers.
Yeah, not only increase productivity, but increase the kinds of things you can do for a living, right? When I was a kid, we had the Atari came out, right? And so as kids, we started wasting a lot of time playing Pong and tank battles and Space Invaders, things like that. And, our parents were like, hey, get off of that thing and get outside and play. The video games aren't going to ever do anything for you. Well, now we have millionaires playing video games for a living on Twitch, right? So, and I'm not saying everyone who plays video games is going to be a millionaire, but there are opportunities for people through the internet, YouTube channels. I mean, there are lots of new jobs for entrepreneurs that weren't there 10 years ago.
No, that's absolutely correct. I mean, we're seeing, Silicon Valley itself is, just none of those jobs would have existed 20 years ago. And now they're some of the, highest paid jobs. I mean, there was an interesting report from the New York Times just the other day saying that, for new machine learning, PhD students, they can come out and immediately earn between like $300,000 to $500,000.
Wow.
At top tech firms. So yeah, these skills are in high demand. If anything, we're struggling because we don't have enough people with those kinds of skills to really help it diffuse across the rest of the economy.
So if you're a worker and maybe you don't have a lot of skills and you're being displaced because you're a taxi driver and Uber and Lyft is a thing, or whatever the next thing that comes along is that displaces you, how can policymakers through regulations and legislation help displaced workers relocate to either a tech job, get that kind of training, or something else?
For sure. That's a great question. And I think thankfully there's a lot of ways that we can make that path much easier. I think I'll actually start off with a few areas that I think get kind of ignored from the conversation. I think lots of people like to focus on, are there ways that we can have better retraining efforts? And those certainly are helpful. But a lot of the times, there's really basic barriers like occupational licensing, which more and more jobs are requiring licenses for, basic service provision like hair braiding, flower arranging, anything, things that there really is not a strong public safety justification for, but occupational licensing, makes it cost, thousands of dollars and thousands of man hours through training before you can begin your work. And if you're trying to take on, a new job, that can be a major barrier. The other factor is that in the cities where we are seeing really large productivity gains and, where a lot of the new jobs are coming from, it's incredibly expensive to move there because housing prices are being propped up by, exclusionary zoning regulations. And it's so expensive. It's really impossible in a lot of major cities, like, the San Francisco area in
Right.
particular, to build new housing there, that it just is increasing housing, to really ridiculous levels. And so if you're wanting to move to a new job, it's becoming more and more difficult because of sort of this combination of things like occupational licensing and really, really high housing prices.
Now, with the high housing prices, people can't get into houses, so they rent. And if everybody's renting, then that pushes rents up.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's pretty basic supply and demand.
Right.
If more people want to move into an area because there's great jobs there, but you're not allowing more housing to be built, of course, prices are going to just continue to go up.
That's crazy. So, as always, the R Street stance is, a bunch of whipsmart millennials who are libertarian minded, free markets, real solutions. That means less regulations. Get those out of the way and just let people figure it out and work. And that's how we get
For sure.
productivity, right?
Yeah, I think there are so many ways that we can improve situations for workers by focusing on removing roadblocks to them. I think there are also a few areas where the government could try to be more proactive. Right now, a big reason you might be scared to leave your job or to move into a new one is that your benefits, like your life insurance and your health insurance, are usually tied to your employer. And so if there are ways to create, more portable worker benefit schemes, that could make it easier and less risky for workers to think about starting their own business or working for a startup or, becoming an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I know that was something that was talked about during the Obamacare debate, where Republicans were putting forth their ideas and their pieces of plans. I don't know that there was one comprehensive plan on the right, but that was one of the things that Republicans talked about was we need to make health insurance, especially, more portable. And then, of course, the Obamacare argument was this will make it portable for everyone. But the problem with Obamacare was all the extra regulations that were wrapped into it. It just turned out to be a disaster. But thanks for putting up with that rabbit trail. Oh, right. I want to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence, especially, and get into quantum computing too. You have an interesting. I didn't read the whole PDF. I just read kind of your summary. Comments to the FTC, the consumer welfare implications associated with the use of algorithmic decision tools, artificial intelligence, and predictive analytics. That's just fun to say, all that stuff.
It's a mouthful.
It is. It is. But it's pretty cool because you're talking about the FTC. Well, I want to take a broader view first. Not just the FTC, but legislative bodies in general and executive bodies in general that do more with regulation. Between legislation and regulation, as we continue to move deeper into artificial intelligence, quantum computing becomes more of a thing. Some of these other technologies that are emerging, autonomous vehicles, are these legislators and regulators, are they well equipped to come up with the right regulations and legislation?
That's a fantastic question, and it's one that we're seeing a lot of attention kind of being paid to right now. I mean, if anyone has watched some of the recent congressional hearings where Mark Zuckerberg, CEO of Facebook, or Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter, have been, asked pretty embarrassing questions by congressmen and by senators. They don't seem to really know how these technologies work or what they do. It seemed, I know people on Twitter were comparing it to, grandparents asking their kids, how does this internet thing work?
Right. Can you set up my WhatsApp?
Yeah, exactly. And that's pretty embarrassing, for countries whose laws, do impact, the rate of innovation all around the world. I think it's really important to try to get, better informed legislators and regulators. And personally, we have to have a willingness to equip them with those resources. So, some of my R Street colleagues have endorsed bringing back the Office of Technological Assessment, OTA, which was kind of like an in-house think tank for Congress. It was basically just trying to provide Congress with resources about how these technologies operate in a nonpartisan way. And I think that would do a lot of good for trying to help legislators, get a handle on these technologies, because right now we're running into situations where Congress doesn't know what to do, and they're just outsourcing more and more of their job to executive agencies and regulators. And so if we can give them the tools to try to understand these technologies themselves, hopefully they do, more of the rulemaking and, offsourcing less of it out to regulatory agencies.
Right. And instead of having to rely on hiring some whip-smart millennials as staffers, although some of them do that, and that can be very helpful. But I like your idea of whatever that thing you said.
The OTA,
yeah, the OTA. Thank you. Yeah.
And I think those two, approaches can be compatible. I mean, I think I would also be, totally fine letting Congress have more, money to hire staffers so that they can make sure they have experts for every topic that are in their staff. Because right now they're being forced to focus on, what lobbyists are saying and what outside sources are saying, and it's hard for them to really know what's going on because they have pretty tightly constrained staff.
Yeah, and it's really hard to know what's going on unless you specifically pay attention to what's coming, because there are some amazing things coming, some soon, some not as soon, but the world's changing, and it's changing rather quickly. Let's talk about artificial intelligence, for example. I've got a Google Home sitting there in front of my TV. I have an iPhone 10, the iPhone 10s. I'm seeing the first reviews on that today, with the 7-nanometer chip that can do trillions of computations per second, which is 100 times faster than the iPhone 10, the A11 Bionic. And the artificial intelligence, even in our phones, even in the cloud for Google and Facebook. I'm seeing commercials for Watson, who won Jeopardy, working with IBM. And then add to that, IBM has a quantum computer. Facebook's working on quantum computing. Google's working on quantum computing. Quantum computers are not going to be something that's going to be a desktop thing, but they're going to operate in the cloud. And we're all going to access quantum computers in the near future through our interaction with other devices that access that information through the cloud. All of this stuff is happening and happening quickly. So getting to the comments to the FTC, how do we make sure that the FTC understands all this? And I only understand it to a small degree. How can they understand it to a deeper degree, along with the implications thereof?
Yeah, it's a tough question. And I think it kind of starts with, the broader understanding of what AI is. I think sometimes it, comes across as this kind of, scary buzzword. You see movies like the Terminator and Skynet is constantly what it's getting compared to.
Oh, I watch Black Mirror. I know. I watch Black Mirror. I know what's coming.
Yeah. I think that hopefully, we can see cultural images of AI also start to change as we, gain a greater appreciation for it. But I tend to take a fairly broad definition of AI and just think about it as, the whole suite of technologies that are kind of helping us slowly automate aspects of human decision making. And so that, includes fairly basic software programs, but also goes up, to IBM's Watson and to, the machine learning algorithms being used by Amazon and Google. And really, the more that these, software programs can kind of apply various models and various means to achieve their desired ends, the more intelligent they are. And so trying to think of artificial intelligence as a spectrum rather than a binary, I think is a helpful categorization. I think some people think, it's either artificially intelligent or it's not. But if you realize there's gradations along there, I think that's helpful and that's useful. And yeah, the FTC and other government agencies, they're realizing that AI kind of as a category, because it affects so many things, can be kind of hard to grasp all at once. Which is why I think some proposals that we've seen for the government to create a new agency that, say, regulates all of AI as a whole tend to be pretty misguided. I think it makes a lot more sense for each existing agency to try to beef up their own technological expertise. In the same way that we don't have a Department of Economics for the whole government. We have economists and departments of economics embedded at all the different agencies, including the FTC, including the Department of Transportation, including the Federal Aviation Administration. So I would love to see different government agencies start hiring more technologists and having offices of, artificial intelligence so that they can begin to understand the way that AI affects their specific industries. Because AI is going to look very different, when it's used for driverless cars versus when it's used for your smartphone or, when it's used to do medical diagnostics. And there isn't a single regulatory framework that makes sense to incorporate all of those things. I think you really need to kind of treat it on a case-by-case basis.
Well, and to underscore that point even more, artificial intelligence, if it's not everywhere already, will be everywhere. And so to have one big department of AI makes no sense at all, because artificial intelligence is already in the devices that we use. And, there are whole industries now being built using various forms of AI. And so AI is going to be either a large part or a small part of everything. And so everybody that regulates and legislates is going to have to understand it better.
I think that's right. And, we are seeing that some agencies are, trying to work on hiring these kinds of technologists that can help them update their processes. I think the Department of Transportation is actually kind of a good example. They've been pretty hesitant to, overregulate or to avoid overregulating driverless cars. They've been pretty good about, allowing them to be tested and trying to bring on more people who understand these processes. And so I hope that other agencies kind of look at the Department of Transportation as an example to be followed so far.
Yeah, and kind of looking at it from the social aspect of that, driverless cars in particular, and I always this is always an opportunity to get my joke in about Phoenix. Phoenix has way more driverless cars than the rest of us. And those Waymo cars are really having an impact in Phoenix that I can tell. And I talked to Ian, your friend, our mutual friend, Ian Adams, about this last time he was on, that they're coming up with some really creative partnerships with Waymo. So where Waymo will either pick you up and take you to the Walmart to get your groceries, or just get your groceries for you and deliver them. I'm not quite clear on how that works, but it's one of those. Where if your car is in the shop, instead of getting a courtesy vehicle, you'll get unlimited Waymo rides while your car's in the shop. These really interesting kind of partnerships. But there are still a lot of people out there, people that I talk to, friends of mine, they want nothing to do with driverless cars, even though logically they may understand that they're way safer than humans because they don't blink, they don't sneeze. One person I talked to who rode in a Waymo in Phoenix told me, he goes, the weirdest thing is they actually stop at stop signs, which I thought was hilarious. But culturally, socially, as these cars, are we going to get used to them? And is that resistance to riding them and using them, enjoying them and enjoying their benefits will erode, I guess, over time?
Yeah, I think you see kind of there's a cultural, there's a waiting period, whenever any new technology is being developed and when it's being, first implemented and integrated into society, where culture has to shift and adapt. I think the camera is actually a pretty good example. People had a lot of concerns about privacy, when cameras first came about. But, over the course of a 10, 20-year period, people eventually realized, hey, this provides a really useful service. I can capture new parts of my life this way. And we can develop social norms and maybe on the margin, new rules to help us, integrate them in safe and appropriate ways. But yeah, for driverless cars, that's been a big cultural divide so far I've seen is, are you above or below the age of, 30, 35? Some of my colleagues who work on driverless car policy, I think culturally there's this association of car ownership with a sense of freedom, and, the ability to get where you want, when you want, how you want. And I think for younger people who, maybe have not owned a car yet, or who are used to getting around via bicycle or now electric scooters or via Uber and Lyft, it's that underlying ability to get where you want, when you want, how you want, less than, the specific object that they care about. And so, I would guess that we'll continue to see kind of that transition play out. And it'll be very interesting to see how, car ownership already plays a really big role in a lot of movies and songs. You think about any country song you listen to,
Right.
Trucks feature very heavily. So, it's always going to be a very interesting transition to see how that works out.
That's true. The official truck of Texas is the Ford F-150. All you have to do is drive the freeways there. You'll see them. Every third vehicle is a Ford F-150 in Texas. That's been my experience.
Yeah.
All right. So back to the FTC thing. Because it's all related. Some of the things you talk about in your comments to the FTC, the possible comments, is making sure that as the FTC considers regulations for artificial intelligence, that it doesn't create a situation where the United States can't compete with Europe or Asia, to where people who are working on AI or companies that are developing AI will choose the United States and not other parts of the world, so we don't regulate ourselves out of jobs.
Absolutely. So that's a huge factor and something that I'm certainly trying to encourage, the FTC and other policymakers to consider as they're thinking about the implications of their decisions, because it's no longer the case, that you only have to think about, what is the ideal framework. You now have to think about, well, how does our framework for, rules and regulations and for general business friendliness compare to other international competitors, like Europe and East Asia in particular. And we're seeing that entrepreneurs really are thinking about regulations as a big part of their decision making. And this kind of broader phenomenon, which is sometimes called global innovation arbitrage, is really important. And we've seen it in things like drones. For example, the FAA has so far been pretty limiting in terms of where you can use drones and in what circumstances. Right now, you always have to have like a line of sight, vision of where your drone is, which makes it very difficult to do, different kinds of package deliveries and things that other countries are experimenting with. So you've seen Canada, Australia, Switzerland have become, test beds for all kinds of drone innovation because the regulations have been more straightforward there and have allowed more testing and deployment. And that's something we have to think about with AI, in the same way that, investment and capital can flow across borders to wherever, it's most highly used based on, different capital taxation rates and whatnot. We're seeing similar things now with laws and where innovation develops. And so we want to make sure that the United States maintains its, current designation as kind of the top place to build AI and other kinds of emerging technology startups. And there's a big concern that, other countries like China may beat us to that.
Now, as we're talking about this, there's the flip side of that coin, where you have all these AI developments that none of us fully understand. We see things like Facebook and Google and the way that they have access to all of our information, partly because we give them that access because we want their cool products for free. But even when you talk about drones as well, we have a lot of these drone regulations in place, partly because of aviation safety, but also partly because of privacy. Some municipalities don't allow drones in certain areas because they don't want people spying on their neighbors, either on purpose or an accident. So as we're thinking about all these, again, regulation and legislation, how do we strike that balance to where we leave the door wide open for innovation, but at the same time we protect ourselves and the citizenry from invasion of privacy?
For sure. I think there's almost always easier ways of handling, some of those specific concerns about privacy than just, outright making it almost impossible to operate that kind of business. People in Canada and Australia care about their privacy too. And I'd have to look more at, their specific frameworks for how they're handling that. But I think, a lot of the kinds of drones that would be potentially used for navigation or for delivery don't typically have cameras that are facing at the bottom. Obviously certain types of drones used for wedding photography and whatnot, that might be more of a concern with, but we can narrowly tailor rules around what is appropriate for privacy without just completely making it impossible to try out those different kinds of business models. But yeah, that's absolutely a conversation we need to have, and regulators should try to strike that balance.
And it's a conversation we have to continually have, not just about privacy, but about, all of it, because all of it is happening and changing so quickly. It seems like it would be almost impossible for regulators and legislators to stay in front of it. But it's a challenge that's before us, and we have to do it.
Yeah, and maybe there's, a general presupposition in favor of innovation that regulators can balance. Because generally, when consumers don't like something, they're going to complain about it, or, they're going to find a competitor who doesn't, have that same problem. That's kind of the problem with the regulate first, ask questions approach, or regulate first, ask questions later approach, is that, you oftentimes don't end up seeing how social norms will adapt around new technologies. And so if we have a general approach of we innovate first and then we see, are there actual harms that should be addressed through regulation? I'm not saying that they never should be, sometimes they should, but allowing the innovations to develop first and then, assessing if there are real harms, I think is kind of a good baseline to work from.
Very good. Before we go, I want to talk about 5G. I heard a story yesterday that 5G is coming a little faster than I thought, and I'm pretty excited about that. And I watch a lot of YouTube videos on the latest phones that are coming out. There are really no 5G phones yet, but it sounds like, and I believe Verizon is probably the first on top of this, that they're already looking at certain markets like Sacramento, Los Angeles. I can't remember. There's a few others where they're going to be unrolling 5G. Is it early as this year? Certainly by next year, where people even, at my apartment, if I signed up for their 5G program, I could get like a hotspot to use for all my devices in my apartment, including my phone. And then, I would need a phone to access 5G later on. This is really exciting. 5G is going to have so many cool applications, including autonomous cars. So how soon can we expect the entire world to be unrecognizable?
That's the nature of innovation, is it's sometimes hard to know exactly when it's going to come. But,
right.
5G is fascinating, and it has a lot of really cool implications. If you're really interested, you should really do a whole, deep dive into 5G. Some of my colleagues at our street focus on broadband deployment as kind of their main issue. My colleague Joe Kane would be a great guy to talk to on that.
Yeah.
But, so I'm not sure exactly what the timeline is, but I know that lots of people in autonomous vehicle, world have been excited about the implications of 5G for allowing, vehicle-to-vehicle communications that way. You can safely know where other vehicles are around you, kind of what their routes are, so you can make sure you slow down in time for them to make the exit on the highway. Or if, they're coming around a building and you can't see them, with line of sight, you could still, know where they are via vehicle communication. And a lot of those kinds of technologies are going to be enabled by much faster, speeds that are enabled by 5G. The other thing is, I think a lot of really cool virtual reality and augmented reality
Right.
applications are very data intensive, and we're fairly limited in what we have with current broadband speeds. And so I'm very excited to see what can happen as we get faster and faster speeds through 5G.
Are you reading the notes that are in my mind? Because that's what I was going to talk about next. There are companies working on AR glasses, and with the 5G broad, the bandwidth that's available, and the lack of latency, all the benefits that you just talked about with autonomous vehicles. But you could, in the near future, conceivably, you could be wearing glasses, walking down the street, look at a storefront. It would tell you maybe their specials, their hours of operation, things like that. You could look at people, and this is the fun part. And I don't know how this would work, if people would have to opt in, but you conceivably could look at people, and maybe their Facebook profile would pop up above their head. You would know their name, their age, if you had any mutual friends. Implications like this are really fun to talk about, and really fun for some people, and really scary for others.
Yeah, and I would imagine, we would have to, think about how that, opt-in versus opt-out strategy would work. Obviously privacy is still important. But yeah, no, augmented reality has a bunch of really cool applications, both kind of socially, just for, walking around town, knowing where discounts are for certain stores, but also, creatively, if you're thinking about, on-the-job training, if you're working, to install, broadband deployment, big wires on the poles, and you don't know what you're doing, maybe you're still learning, you can have an augmented reality screen, help you right there as you're deploying, and you can just have like a little screen in front of you that tells you where to connect what. And I think there's a lot of implications for workplace training, and for kind of just having a screen right there in front of you that tells you what to do while still being able to use both of your hands. I think that's an exciting prospect.
Yeah, I think that's really cool too. And while you were saying that, I was thinking, so you could have the wires virtually in place, and then you would put the real wires, just match them, and you're done. I could start working for the electric company if this podcast thing doesn't work out. That's
perfect. And that then
right.
Ties back to our earlier conversation about how does new technology enable new jobs, and people to train themselves for new jobs as well.
Right. And then I guess we'll tie it up in a neat bow back to the artificial intelligence and Skynet. And I guess part of the fear is that when you have 5G or even 4G and the connected world that we live in now, that these artificial intelligize, as they, all the way from your spell check program, I think was probably the original AI, right? Which I love.
Or spam filter.
Right. Yeah, spam filters. They're going to be able to all get together. And the smartest ones, the AIs that are being taught how to better themselves and reproduce themselves, conceivably could learn how to better themselves exponentially faster than we humans can, and then they would teach their AI brethren, and then that's how we get Skynet. Why is that not going to happen?
I think a lot of people like coming up with fantastical stories about AI taking over everything, because as we're thinking about the future, it's always in some ways you want an inherent conflict in your story. And so if you're thinking about a story, having, an AI that goes wrong is a lot more interesting than, just an AI that helps you get a slightly better product. You can tell a story around that first one much more than you can around the second one.
Yeah.
Which is why sometimes science fiction is not always, the most useful guide to the future. Even though I still do love sci-fi.
Yes, we all love sci-fi.
The vast majority of, AI applications that we are using or developing today are very narrow in their domain. The top chess computer, it can certainly beat the top, human chess player, but they would have no idea what to do in Sudoku. They can't, play music. Right now, AIs are very good at the narrow targets or the narrow tasks that we train them for, but they can't really do other things. And so we're trying to develop AIs that, can take applications, learn from one game, and maybe apply them to another. but we're still fairly basic in that. And even then, I think intelligence is a lot more complicated than we sometimes give it credit for. Humans have a bunch of, soft and social skills that are really difficult to replicate, for machines. And so I'm very not concerned, at least in the near term, about, AI taking over. And if we do eventually reach a future where, AI continues to develop and they're better at, almost all tasks than humans, that just means that we'll have reached a future where almost everything is free, because presumably we'd be able to produce, all the items that we would need for daily life, very low cost. It would almost be like a Star Trek replicator situation. So, no, I'm not too worried about long-term AI.
See, I like what the picture you just painted, that if AI gets so smart that they can exceed us, as long as they stay benevolent, we can all end up at the beach sipping Mai Tais, and our robot partners will be making those and bringing them to us.
Absolutely. And that's the whole sort of AI alignment debate. And I think it is worth thinking about.
Sure.
How do we ensure that if we can eventually develop systems that are smarter than us, how do we make sure that they are still aligned with the goals that we set for them, or that we don't accidentally set dumb goals that, we end up regretting later? Right. And so it's certainly worth, thinking about that and trying to figure out, new ways of ensuring value alignment. But I don't think it should be, a top cause of concern for regulators and policymakers today.
Right. So as you're watching the latest episode, I don't know when the next season is going to drop of Black Mirror, but as you're watching Black Mirror and you're freaking out, realize that, they're telling a story. You got to have conflict. Dystopias sell way better on Netflix than could you imagine? Could you imagine a series of a utopia? It'd be, 45 minutes of people strumming harps at the beach, and that would be the whole show. No one would watch that. So, yeah, it makes sense.
No one would watch that.
Exactly. Caleb Watney, we could talk for hours. You probably have work to do. So I just appreciate your time and enjoy having you on. We'll get Joe Kane on, and we'll get you back on again as well.
Sounds great. Always fun to talk with you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you so much, Caleb. Really appreciate it. All right, have a great day, all right?
Thanks, you too.
All right, see ya. All right, was Caleb. He still is. I just hung up, that's all. Caleb Watney, again, with the R Street Institute. rstreet.org is the place to go to check them out. Just fascinating how these whip-smart millennials, again, that are libertarian-minded, that are working on these policies, that are helping policymakers, to think about things and to hopefully come up with the right answers with the minimal amount of unintended consequences. You're never going to eliminate those completely. That's why you have to always reassess, always continually think about all the stuff that we talked about, and we just scratched the surface. All right, I have to give you an update because while I was recording, I got the alert. The National Weather Service has issued a flash flood watch for tomorrow. Let's see when it goes until 11 o'clock tomorrow night. 11 o'clock tomorrow morning until 11 o'clock tomorrow night. Flash flood watch now in effect for the Tucson area, most of southeastern Arizona. And so, as I started this podcast saying, one of two things is going to happen. Either there won't be a flash flood watch and we may get heavy rain, or there will be a flash flood watch and we'll test the National Weather Service flash flood watch jinx, because most of the time since I've lived here 13 years now, whenever there's a flash flood watch, nothing happens. Now, big exception last year. We had numerous flash flood watches that did happen. I thought the jinx was over, but then earlier this year we had a flash flood watch, nothing happened. I'm not saying I want flooding. I want everyone to be safe. I want people's property to be safe. But the Weather Service is saying 1.5 to 2 inches of rain, certainly not just possible, but kind of likely in the Tucson metro. That would be wonderful. What a great way for monsoon 2018 to make her exit. And the chance of storms lingers into Thursday, too. We'll see. All right, episode 5 of Mike Check with Mike Shaw, the podcast, is done. I'm going to hit stop record. I'm going to upload all this to the various places. Of course, mikecheck.us, M-I-K-E check.us. It's kind of the hub, and you can follow me on social media from there. You can listen to the podcast there. From there, it gets pushed out to iTunes and Google Play Music and TuneIn and other things as well. And I'll be tweeting this stuff too. And I'll also be posting this to the YouTube channel. That is episode number 5. Tomorrow we'll have episode number 6. We'll talk about a national effort to increase school choice. It's a good thing. We'll talk about the local efforts, more of the outside interest efforts to thwart school choice here in the state of Arizona. Should be an interesting episode number 6. All right, that's our podcast for today. As always, may God's love ever be with you.